Thank you all very much for coming. I'm James Brooks, president of SAR, and this is a continuing in our membership lecture series for this year where we wanted to look back and try to demonstrate to our members just how broad the range of research that SAR has supported over the last 42 years at least in the resident scholar program. We've had more than 200 resident scholars over those decades. And we went back and tried to find some people who were crowd favorites in the past when they were here. How many of you were at Bill Saturno's first lecture in 2005? Yeah, you remember that, yeah. This is quite a way to wrap things up. So before we get started, I want to thank the series sponsors for this lecture series, the William H. Donner Foundation, Betty and Luke Vortman Endowment Fund, Thornburg Investment Management, the Lannan Foundation, and the Pikes Peak Community Foundation. Bill Saturno's lecture is sponsored by George Wilson. And George, are you with us somewhere? Yes, there's George. Thank you very much. And I think Betty Vortman is here as well. Hi, Bet. Thanks. Thank you both so much. It's great to have you. And a special thanks to George and Sheila Gummerman for sponsoring the after-lecture dinner over at La Casa Cena. George is a longtime participant in SAR's programs, was our first NEH fellow in 1974, I think. He was very, very young at that time. He had just got his doctorate. And Sheila has put up with us all for many years, so thank you for doing that. Bill Saturno took his PhD from Harvard University in the year 2000. He was with SAR in 2005 and 6 as an NEH and Weatherhead resident scholar. While with us, he was working on a book called Let There Be Kings, Creation, Mythology, and the Origins of Maya Divine Rule. He's currently assistant professor of archaeology at Boston University. From 1994 to 2000, Dr. Saturno served as a field director of the Rio Amarillo Archaeological Project in western Honduras, examining ancient socio-political relationships between large and small Maya cities around the site of Copan. In March of 2001, and some of you who heard his first lecture will remember this, while exploring in northeast Guatemala for Harvard's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, he discovered the remote archaeological site of San Bartolo and the oldest intact murals ever found in the Maya world. Since then, he has directed the San Bartolo Regional Archaeological Project, dedicated to the excavation and conservation of these spectacular murals, and to understanding San Bartolo's role in the largely unexplored region of the Maya area during the period when Maya civilization itself was just beginning to form. Now, 10 years later, in 2010, Saturno and Franco Rossi discovered what they believed to be a workroom of a Xultun record keeper. The murals at Xultun are separated by more than 900 years, nearly a millennium of Maya history from those at San Bartolo, and reflect very different relationships between the society and the cosmos. Dr. Bill Saturno explores the most recent finds in this lecture tonight and paints a picture of Maya society driven by royal figures who exploited art and science to establish and maintain their place as symbol and center of Maya urban life. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bill Saturno.
Thank you. Well, that about does it. I mean, the introduction was spectacular. Thank you all for coming. I am going to talk tonight about these two very different sets of Maya paintings. They're separated by those 900 years, but they're also only separated by about 8 kilometers, right? So that having such a sort of condensed geographical area, but this really broad temporal expanse makes for some sort of very interesting comparisons as to really how we get from A to B in this part of the Maya world. Now, specifically, which part of the Maya world is this? This that I'm showing you is sort of just a general map of the Maya area of Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. And zooming in, you'll see that I have San Bartolo and Xultun really as a single entity. And I have them as a single entity mainly because at the scale that this map is drawn, to separate 8 kilometers between them, it really just looked like a, sort of a Bactrian camel in the middle of the Maya lowlands. And so it made more sense to just have one hump instead of 2. So San Bartolo is a little bit further to the north. Altogether, it's a much smaller site than that of Xultun. Of course, in 2001, while exploring, well, essentially just by good fortune, we ended up at the site of San Bartolo and discovered the first part of a mural program that we would spend the next 10 years excavating and conserving. And it began really with this very simple little scene of the Maya maze god that we have here. He's in this great dynamic pose. He's at the center of the north wall, and his arms reach out in front of him, but his face looks behind to a series of kneeling figures. He's actually sort of passing offerings out of the underworld on his journey to the surface of the earth. Now, as we continued excavations in this chamber, and it really is really an odd little chamber. Architecturally, this is a very strange building. It's strange for a number of reasons. One is that this is this sort of nice big platform. There's a big pyramid on top of it. There's a temple at the top of that pyramid, and there are paintings inside that temple, very fine paintings. Unfortunately, that temple is very close to the modern surface, and the paintings that the Maya left in place in that room were destroyed by time. The walls of that room that the Maya knocked down, ironically, those paintings have been preserved, so that we have a sense of what's going on up top, and it's a very fine painting, but it's very restricted in terms of its audience. Now, the murals at San Bartolo that I'm going to talk about come from down here. They are not at the top of the temple. They're not even on the front side of the pyramid. They're at the bottom and at the back. There is no great staircase that someone has to ascend in order to get into this room. There's a single step. There's a very wide but low doorway, and once you enter this space, you're essentially surrounded by the paintings. You actually have to duck a little bit to get into the room. Even I have to duck a little bit to get into the room. But once you get in, you stand up, and the murals begin. Their feet are all at eye level, and you're surrounded. 9.5 meters of paintings on the west wall, 4.5 meters of paintings to the north. The east wall and the south wall were unfortunately destroyed in antiquity. Again, left only in a fragmentary state, a puzzle of more than 5,000 pieces that we're currently trying to put back together. The quality of the painting in this room is spectacular. It's even more remarkable to say that this isn't the good mural, right? The idea that the one up top was actually the important one, painted with a brush with only 3 hairs. The hieroglyphs are more fine. The lines themselves, tiny, minuscule details painted. And then to see this and say, okay, this was the one that was essentially downstairs, important, but for more mass consumption. This isn't a public painting. It's not on a wall in the middle of town, but at the same time, it is not a restricted access space. This is at the bottom, at the back. The story that's told combines this myth of creation, right? Sort of each wall contains various chapters of this epic tale of creation. Different characters, different gods, the Itzamna, the creator god, the principal bird deity, as we call him, Mut Itzamna, the avatar, the avian avatar of the creator god, the false sun that we know from later Maya mythology, from the Popol Vuh. Right? These are characters that we see. This individual, the patron deity of Maya kings, we see repeatedly on the west wall of this room. He's identified by this single black spot on his cheek. In the Popol Vuh from the 17th century, he was known as Hunahpu. In the classic period, we see him on Maya vases, his name slightly different, Hunahau. That Hun is the number 1. That's the spot on his cheek. What he was called in this painting, we don't know. This is from the 1st century BC, right? Centuries earlier than the images we have of him in the classic period. But what he's doing on the murals at San Bartolo, these are recognizable actions. These are things that we see or expect Hunahpu or Hunahau to be doing. Essentially defining the space, doing what kings do, establishing the kingdom. We see him repeatedly on the west wall, and I won't show all 4 of his appearances, but we see him repeatedly performing self-sacrifice in front of a series of trees. And in those trees is this great monstrous bird. You can see his great tail feathers hanging down, his talons, his wings spread out. All right, this isn't a normal bird. If you're walking through the forest and you saw this bird, you'd probably say, "Oh crap," and run out of the forest. Right? This bird has spear points in his wings. He wears a crown, not common among normal birds. He's also a little bit portly. Not that I'm, have anything I can say, but he's caused the branches of this tree to splay out under his great weight. In front of him, our Hunahau, right, the single spot on his cheek, offers his own blood. The blood offered from his genitals, right? I will not be duplicating this evening, even at the dinner. So don't worry. It's not like one price of admission gets me and then another price gets me running a spear through my genitals. We don't have that price of admission. What he has tied to his back is a deer in this case. And you see he stands just along the ground line. Here, a sacrifice of that same deer, right, bent backwards over this tripod, tied with this great knot. His belly has been split open, stones have been piled up, and his essence, his life force and smoke rise up as an offering to this monstrous bird. The other sacrifices that we see, because again, we see him 4 times. The first time we see him, he's standing in a field of flowers, offering his own blood and the scent of those flowers. The next time we see him, as though we've turned the page in a great Maya book, we see him offering his own blood again, this time floating just above the ground line, birds tied to his back, offering the sacrifice of a turkey. We then see him sacrificing a deer, and then finally we see him walking in a current of water, with a fish in a net on his back, sacrificing that great catfish, right? All to this monstrous bird. Essentially, in front of 4 of these trees, the trees of the 4 corners of the world. He's essentially creating a bounded space. If we think about this monstrous bird as a symbol of the wilds of those forests, right? And how that's the exact opposite of what we expect of civilization, right? Civilization is the creation of man. Man-made creations are creations of 4 sides, right? The 4-sided house, plaza, temple, cornfield. These are all artificial creations brought about by us. They're invasions into the forest wild. What Hunahau is doing is he's defining the space, offering these sacrifices. This bird is essentially descending from this floral paradise of the east where he begins into the underworld of the west. He's clearing the way for the coronation of kings. Now, this isn't actually the only time we see these 4 sacrifices. These exact 4 sacrifices occur at the bottom of 4 pages in the Dresden Codex, right? A book that was written at some point, maybe in the 13th or 14th century. These pages discuss a ceremony that's taking place at the new year, essentially renewing the world through sacrifice. the sacrifice is being conducted in front of 4 trees. Those trees are named with the cardinal directions: the tree of the east, the tree of the west, the north, the south. They're also named as the tree of that monstrous bird, right? The tree of Mut Itzamna. And the sacrifices being offered, we have the scattering of blood, actually coming from a sacrificed bird, right? This is not Hunapu or Hunahau doing it. It is a priest, right? It's a ritual specialist that is using the blood of a sacrificed animal and offering that on top of the hock of a deer, a fish, a turkey, and incense, a great incensario, the smell of flowers. So that 1,500 years later, after the paintings at San Bartolo show a god essentially creating the 4 corners of the world, creating that bound space of civilization, you have priests reenacting that thing, doing the same ceremony in order to renew the world at the new year. Now, at San Bartolo, the point of this establishment of 4 corners really revolves around what goes on between the 4 corners. Once you have the 4 corners of the world here sort of represented by these 4 babies, and this guy bursting forth. It's like a happy birthday, right? The surprise! He's just bursting out of this gourd, and he's surrounded by blood and life force. He's just coming out of this. It's his coming out party. We actually have an image of this gourd on one of the other walls. It's before this in time, essentially. The gourd is in the hand of the creator god. He's handing it out of the cave mouth, right, of the underworld. We can't see who he's handing it to, but what we can see is that it is labeled with 3 Maya hieroglyphs. Those hieroglyphs, the first one is blood. The second one is man. And the third one is gourd, right? They've essentially labeled this thing Blood Man Gourd. Like, later in this story, you will see this thing explode with blood and men, right? A happy 4-directioned piñata with, at the very center, this guy with a jade belt and a helmet, an ear spool. He's different than the other guys around him. Well, who is he? Well, on the west wall, we see him. We see him seated upon a scaffolding right here. This is his belt, his ear spool. He's got the same helmet. He's being crowned king, right? We have an attendant here climbing up a ladder, passing him a headdress. That headdress is the same headdress that Maya kings wear for the next 700 years, right? The text ends in the glyph Ahau for Lord or King. So here at the site of San Bartolo, arguably a very small site in the pre-classic, right? In the 1st century BC, in a painting that is intended as a message, right? This is the doctrine, essentially, that demonstrates not only the acts of gods in creation, but relates all of those acts, ties them all together to a single event, which is the crowning of the king. The king at San Bartolo is not claiming the right to rule through an extensive dynastic line. He's in fact showing himself in the same guise as gods, right? I am king because I do the things that gods do. I'm your intermediary. I am the representative of God on earth. If you have any questions, I'm the one to ask. How do you know? Did you see me pop out of the gourd? Did you see all the babies and the blood? I'm sitting on the scaffolding. I look just like the maize god, right? These are the things that I do. Now, it was great seeing all of those little sort of trivia things about Morley coming up to this talk. Because this, of course, is a sign posted by Sylvanus Morley. He posted these signs all over the Petén, essentially saying, two chicleros, two guys heading out into the rainforest looking for gum resin. On the next season that you go out into the forest, take note if you see any archaeological sites, especially those with carved hieroglyphic monuments. Because if you find some and you can bring me to them on my next visit, I will pay you $25 in gold. That's a great deal, by the way. I'd still take it. Just so you know, these signs no longer exist. But nonetheless, this sign led to the discovery of the site of Xultun. In 1915, a guy by the name of Aurelio Aguayo, a chiclero, responding to this sign, produced good coordinates to bring Morley and his team back to the site in the 1920s. Morley visited the site, named the site Xultun, after one particular monument at the site, which was at the time thought to be the most recent of all Maya monuments. Xultun means end stone. The monument, dated to 889 AD, was essentially, as far as Morley was concerned, the last monument erected by the Maya of the Old Empire. Now, of course, at this point we know there are some monuments that date to more recent than that, only a few, and some that date to that exact same date of 889 AD. But nonetheless, what was going on at Xultun at the very end of the 9th century was very much business as usual. Now, that was all fine and good. We have Xultun that was known, San Bartolo unknown. Now we know about both of them. They're separated by 8 kilometers, and we know that Xultun starts out, as far as we know, in the early Classic. There are monuments at Xultun that date to around 4, maybe 300 AD. So from 300 AD to almost 900 AD, Xultun is going strong. San Bartolo, in comparison, is very active from around the 4th century BC until the 1st or 2nd century AD. So it very much seems like Xultun picks up right where San Bartolo leaves off. Now, that may or may not be the case, and our current research is about trying to figure out what exactly is going on in that middle time. But in 2010, the very day that I finished the conservation work in San Bartolo, the very day the last stone was put in the ceiling. And by putting that last stone in the ceiling, there was a large conservation crew, and this was the last day, and there was really just a couple of stones left. But they called me in and they said, there's this stone, we have to get it up there, but we can't put it up there because we need to excavate a little bit more up into the ceiling in order to have space to maneuver it into place. And I looked up at the ceiling and I said, I can't do that. That stone will fall. I know it. If I move this one, that one's falling down. And I actually don't know how many stones above it will fall down. That's the one I can see, and I guarantee it will fall. But I don't know what else is above. We could have a huge collapse. I don't know what's going to happen. But we sat there, and the fact of the matter remained. We could not finish the work that we were doing. 10 years of work could not be finished unless that one stone could be removed. So I went up, and I held my hand on the stone that I was certain would fall, and I removed the other stone. And I held my hand on it. I didn't feel any weight. I thought, and I pulled my hand away. Nothing. I put my hand back on it. I pulled my hand away. And I turned to the conservator and I said, I really thought that was going to wham! And it fell right on my head. 2 rocks, actually, one and the one above it. I, of course, caught them so as not to have them fall back onto the mural. We were able to put that stone in place, but I did give myself quite a nice concussion. A lovely reminder, really, from the Maya gods that you're not really in charge of the situation. Thanks for visiting. Wacko. On that very day, as I'm nursing my dizzy skull back in camp, arguing with my wife, who's telling me I should really go out to the hospital, and me saying, no, I'm totally fine. Oh, I'm sure it'll just pass. If it's going to kill me, I'd have died already. It's fine. I was wearing a hat, after all. Not a hard hat, but a hat. Cushioned the blow, at least. On that day, one of my undergraduate students, very excited, comes back to camp. A student by the name of Max Chamberlain. Now, Max Chamberlain had actually said, when we headed down to Guatemala, well, Bill, I'm really thrilled I'm going to get to go to Guatemala with you. I know you found that mural. That's awesome. I'm going to find one. I was like, well, good luck, Max. I mean, murals it's not that the Maya didn't paint them. They certainly painted lots of murals. It's that they don't really preserve very well in a tropical environment. That's why there haven't been a lot of them found. Bonampak was found in 1946. Then San Bartolo was found 55 years later in 2001. There have been some other ones found since then, so Max had an argument. I'm pretty sure I'm going to find one. Go ahead, Max. Have at it. Max came into camp that day. Bill, I found a mural. Said, no, I don't think you did, Max. Said, no, I found it. It's really cool. And he showed me the picture he drew of it. And I was really excited about it. And I feel bad about this now. Because what I said to Max was, no, Max, you didn't find a mural. And we've never had this conversation. First, you should find about $1 million. Then, come and tell me you found a mural. But certainly don't tell me you found a mural on the day we finished with the last mural that took us 10 years to deal with. I have no time for a mural. I have no money for a mural. You found nothing. Thanks for coming. I calmed down the next day. I started to feel a little less nauseated, a little bit better. I looked at the pictures Max had drawn, and eventually I agreed to go out and look at Max's mural. There it is. Ta-da! I felt a lot better about it. I can tell you. I was like, well, that's not going to take me 10 years. Like, there's a line. There's another little line, sort of a circle. Max had imagined this brilliant thing. This was, for Max, an ear spool. There was a face in here somewhere. There was this great headdress. The drawing that he had was spectacular. He had actually found 5 of them that day. He took me to a whole bunch. What he found were a number of walls. It's like, those are walls. They don't actually have paint on them. This one does have paint on it, but unfortunately, it's about 1 meter below the surface. I mean, this is a very small mound. It's a house mound. This is not a temple. This is not some pyramid. San Bartolo is 15 meters underground. It's buried by an enormous later construction. This is 1 meter below the surface. I said, Max, it's really very cool that you found a painting here. You know, this is essentially a household painting. This is part of an elite residential complex. You know, it's not some enormous palace. And here you have painting in it. Now, unfortunately, we're never going to know what it looks like. You know, the fact is that it's just too close to the surface. It simply won't be preserved. But at the very least, it had been uncovered by looters. This part had clearly decayed more than it would be underneath the fill. I thought, well, at the very least, Max, we can at least find out how big the room is. I said, I'll just excavate. It looks like the looter's tunnel almost hits the back wall. It didn't quite get to the back wall, but you know, if I just continue maybe 20, 30 centimeters, I should be able to hit the back wall. The room can't be much wider because it had a vault. Clearly wouldn't have been too wide. And I said, and it doesn't look like, I mean, the looter's tunnel tried to get to the center of the room. There wasn't a lot of mound left on either side. I said, well, we know where the west wall is. This is the west wall that Max had uncovered a piece of, or had seen uncovered. I said, if I just dig perpendicular to the tunnel, maybe 1 meter, maybe half a meter, I'll find the east wall. Then we'll know what the dimensions are. We can go home happy, say, there was a painting, you found it, it's great. Would have been nice to see what it was, but alas, that'll never happen. So I dug the 20 centimeters, and that's what I found. It's like, Max? Okay, so that's the face of the Maya king. And he's wearing this great blue headdress, this big red feather across. He's got feathers coming out of his ear spools. He's carrying this little white staff in front of him. And I thought, okay, that's not 10 years, but it's something. That's really wild. Why is this here? Why is it preserved? Okay, A, there shouldn't be a portrait of the king in this house. Why do I have a portrait of a king in a house? This isn't a king house, it's just a house. So why is he here? Who invited him here, and who left him painted on the wall? I then excavated a little bit, as I had planned, to the east to see what I'd see. And I found a very small, very poorly eroded, badly damaged section of painting. The east wall is really very close to the exterior surface of the mound, but it was covered in numbers. I thought, I don't know what those are. That's a lot of numbers. Well, we'll figure it out after. The following year, we sort of faced a real dilemma. Because the fact of the matter is I didn't know how long it would take to go from a painting like this to a painting like Max's. I know that Max's painting had been uncovered by looters, but I don't know when. I don't know how quickly it dissolved to the state that it's in. Did that take 5 years? Did it take 1 year? Did it take 30 years? I have no idea. So all of a sudden, what I don't know is, how long is this going to last? We've documented this part as best we can. Clearly the rest of the room is painted. Clearly the east wall is very damaged. The north wall is in better shape because it was the back wall of the room. The west wall, I'm assuming, gets in better shape the farther the north we go. But there's a lot of questions to be answered. What we did was we returned the following year. Myself, my graduate student Franco Rossi, Heather Hurst, the artist that had drawn the murals at San Bartolo, as well as the murals at Bonampak, Angelin Bass Rivera, who had been our wall painting conservator at San Bartolo from the beginning, resident here of Santa Fe, Angelin Bass. She came out as well, and this very small crew to try and do as quickly as possible, excavate, document, conserve, record, and hope for the best in terms of this painting. That expedition was put together very quickly and funded entirely by National Geographic. As part of that, they sent down their photographers. This is the mound. Now, you can see there's another one right there. I mean, this is just a house mound. And as we excavated the rest of this room, we found that the north wall was spectacular. The west wall got better the further north we went. And though the east wall was in the worst condition of the three, it actually proved to be the most interesting. Heather was able to do architectural reconstructions. This is the king who sits in this niche in the back of the room. And I'll talk a little bit about the east wall first. Now you can see the east wall doesn't look like much, right? It doesn't look much different than Max's wall. There is some detail that we can make out. You see this black here, and with the wonderful eye of Heather, and you can see this is actually the face of a Maya guy. He's wearing a particular headdress, and we recognize him best because there are 3 of him on the west wall, so that he's fairly easy to see. The rest of this wall is really a mystery to us, but what we noticed was that in the areas that weren't covered by the figure, there are these texts. Some of which absolutely minuscule texts. Well-painted hieroglyphs about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. Some of them 1/2 centimeter by 1/2 centimeter, all painted in black or red line. Very similar to the kind of things that we would see in codices. Now, normally a Maya text follows a particular syntax, a pattern, right, in which you're given a date, and then after the date, you're given an action. After that action, you're given the object the action was enacted on, and then in the end, you're given the subject, he who did the thing. But in this instance, we don't get any of that. We actually just get a number and a date, and then a number and a day, and then a number and a day, and then a number and a day. It's just days. It's just counts of days. And when we look at the whole wall, we see that there are tons of these texts. That in fact, all the available space on the wall between existing figures is covered with these minute texts. And those texts themselves were not permanent fixtures in the room, because we see where plaster has been covered over in a pre-existing text in order to write a new one on top of it. Right? This is very much being used like a blackboard. Now, I'll focus first on this text. Using a little processing, relay the image. What you have is a series. This is actually the very spot that my little test excavation to the east wall hit. I hit those numbers. There we go. Now, when we uncovered the whole thing, we realized that we had actually a fairly long array of numbers, each of which had a column with 3 numbers in them. And at the head of each column was a glyph. Now, those numbers are quite telling, because in reality what they represent, we could identify a pattern. Here we had 13, 5, 4. That's how the Maya write numbers. This is actually the number 4,784. The way Maya units work, these are 1s, these are 20s, and these are 360s. So you have 13 times 360 plus 100 plus 4 gives you 4,734. 4784. Now, this column here, we see we have 12 at the top, then a 14, and a 6. That's 4,606. Now, these numbers are probably not jumping out at you and saying, wow, that's an incredibly significant number. 4606, well, of course. Eureka! 4784, ha ha! We've uncracked the code. No, of course not. But the importance between those two numbers is that they're separated by 178. And for Ramayanists, 178 or 177, those are very important numbers, because those are the numbers the Maya used to keep track of the moon. Why? Well, the period of the moon is 29 and a half days, more or less. Well, 29 and a half sucks mathematically, right? That's just the basics of it. Adding 29 and a halves, you're not getting anywhere. How do you calculate that? What they did was they grouped them in periods of 6. They took 6 lunations. 29 and a half times 6 is 177. Now, if you add 177s over and over and over and over again, right, eventually you start to get farther and farther away from the actual reality of the moon, not unlike our leap year, right? Our leap year, we know the year is 365 days. Every 4 years, we add that extra day, except for every 100 years, you don't add the extra day. Except for every 400 years, you do add the extra day. Okay, these are probably parts of this equation that you don't know or don't need to know, because who lives that long? Nobody. But the fact of the matter is it's this dance, trying to use, right, sort of whole numbers to try and estimate what is a not perfect period, right? 365 and not quite a quarter days, we estimate with our little dance of leap year, not leap year, leap year, not leap year. Well, the same thing is going on with this table. That in fact what the Maya are doing, and this column, if we reconstruct the numbers all the way back, what they do is they add 177, 177, 177, 177, 177, 178. Every 5th or 6th time, they need to add a 178. So that in the end, after 162 lunations, 4,784 days, their estimated period of the moon is off by about 3 minutes per year. That is a good system. Now, why is it painted on the wall of this room in Xultun? And it has nothing to do with the other paintings of the room, right? There's an image of the king, right? What does this have to do with the king? In reality, we see that all of the writing, these small writings in the room, and one of the things David Stewart also noticed, he was the one that said, well, and on the top of each of these columns, by the way, is the glyph for the moon. And in fact, each of these columns, there's a patron of the moon, where the patron is either a woman, a skull, or a corn god. And it just goes back and forth between the three of them. Just alternates between these lunar patrons. And what you get is a table that can actually be used. So that if you have one date, you know where the moon is, you know what the patron god of the moon is, you know what lunation in that patron god's 6 lunations you're in, and you add a number of days, you then calculate. Say we go forward this many days, you end up later in the table, and you can tell where you're supposed to be. So that if you're writing a monumental inscription, this is the table you use to calculate the right days after the right amount of time. We see this in one place. We've never seen this type of table anywhere in the Maya world during the Classic period. The only place we see these are in the Codices, in the Dresden Codex. We see tables very much like this. In that instance, adding not 178 days every 5th or 6th time, but adding 148, because by that point, that's what they're using to calculate when you're going to have an eclipse, because they realize that an eclipse happens during that particular lunation. That if you shorten that other lunation from 177, if you use 5 lunations instead of 6 to 148, then you get the period where you're going to have an eclipse. One of the other things we have written on the wall here at Xultun, which you've never seen anyplace else other than a Maya codex, is what we call a ring number. This is actually incised into the wall, and it starts with 10 kimi, and it gives a long count of days, right? Actually, 34,314 days. But this ring, this circle around the last number, means that this doesn't function like a normal Maya date. Normally, what we would do is we take the number of days listed, and we would add them to their 0 day. That circle, in fact, means you subtract them from the 0 day. You actually go back in time to a period before the current 0 day. So that this date being recorded is actually the 25th of September, 3207 BC. Right? Now, why do they do that? What they'd like to do is they're going back in time to an event that takes place, sometimes a celestial event, at least that's what it is in the Codices, a celestial event that takes place in the previous era. And they're connecting it to the event that's taking place in the current era. Right? Those are the calculations that they're doing. And we see them in 2 places now. The Codices from around the 14th or 15th century, and here on the wall in Xultun from the beginning of the 9th century. Let's take a look at the north wall. Here we have Heather's reconstruction painting over the top, makes everything a little bit clearer. We have our king in his glorious headdress, seated on his throne, holding the scepter in his hand. There's actually a text in front of him that describes what he's doing, that he's impersonating a Maya god. He's appearing as the image of that god on this day. We have this individual in front of him, this large medallion on his chest. He's well dressed, he's got little jade wristlets. He actually extends his hand, and it looks like he holds a stylus in his hand, like he himself is a scribe. His title is given right here. His title is Itzin Tach. And it's not a title that we're terribly familiar with. It means little brother obsidian, or the younger obsidian, or junior obsidian. And we don't know what an obsidian is, but this is the title that all the individuals on the walls in Xultun bear. They are all called an obsidian of one rank or another. Now there's some other sort of interesting details. Right here you have just a sketch of a head, just painted, disembodied head floating in the air behind this individual. You have this guy here kneeling behind the king, essentially holding up his headdress. There's another text above him as well that actually gives the king's name and titles. The name part is unfortunately damaged, but his titles identify him as the Holy Lord of Xultun. But importantly, there's this little bit here. Just a little bit. It's painted in red. If I process it for you, you'll see it's another series of numbers. Now, these numbers are much larger than those numbers that we saw in that lunar table. Right? That lunar table was one series of numbers. These ones have 5 digits. So that these count days, 20 days, 360 days, 7,200 days, and 144,000 days. Now, the largest of these is 17 of those 144,000 day periods. 17 baktuns. These are all huge numbers. Some of them 2 baktuns, 17, 12, 8, right? They all just are these large numbers. But what do they have in common? They're not an additive sequence like that other table, right? They're not adding up series of days. But what they do is they're all, each one of them, individually, is a multiple of important periods of Maya time. Each of them is a multiple not only of the 260-day ceremonial calendar, but also of the 365-day solar calendar. Each of them is also a multiple of that combination, of that 18,980-day cycle, that 52-year cycle, the calendar round. Each of them is also a multiple of the 584-day period of Venus. Each of them is also a multiple of the 780-day period of Mars. In fact, the largest divisible number for all these is like 53,000 something or other, which happens to relate the period of Mars to that 52-year period. It coordinates those two. These are all just large, commensurate numbers. What does that mean? It means we're in a room full of geeks. That's what it means. Okay? For those of you that unfortunately dozed off at the third number that I gave, good reason. I looked at it, I was like, yeah, I am not the number guy. But there are number guys, and those number guys crunch these numbers, and this is like asking someone to figure out a problem and say, what I need are numbers that all of these numbers can be factored into. Go. And they're just painted up on the wall. Now, again, the only place we see stuff like this is in the Dresden Codex. It's in fact a table very much like the one we were just looking at. It happens to be also right next to one of the versions of the ring number. I just wanted to show you that this page has a whole series of these little numerical tables, these tables of multiples. That's what the Maya were about during this time. They're about understanding their connection to these cyclical patterns in time and space, especially being able to predict when things like Venus will appear as the morning star, where it will vanish as the evening star. That period of time between those was a warning cycle that the Maya were very focused on. What these numbers do is that they sort of tie in to all of these important cycles in Maya life. But why are those cycles important? Well, throughout the classic period, those cycles, those calendrical cycles, are used really for one thing and one thing only. And that is to anchor the events in a king's life to mythic time. Right? What I do happens on this date. This date happens to be the anniversary of an event that happened long in the past. When that event happened, Venus was in this place. Mars was in this place. The moon was in this place. Right? That's what these numbers do. That's what these tables do. Now, what we're looking at in this room is really the first time we get to see the production of this knowledge, the use of this knowledge during the classic period. Because essentially what we're looking at are often things that are sort of discontinuous. We see these calculations of all of these cycles in the Codices, but we don't see them during the classic period. We have all of these classic inscriptions in which these calculations clearly had to have been done, but we don't get to see how they did them. here at Xultun, we finally have a space in which the tables are being recorded at the time that these dates are being used and manipulated and projected by Maya kings. Now that's a very different statement than the one being made by the kings at San Bartolo. The kings at Xultun are saying, I am king because I am at one with the world around us, right? I can demonstrate my knowledge of the world through this interaction. I have a crew of specialists holed up in a room on the edge of town, even as we speak, calculating cycles millions of days from now, right? So who are these guys? Who are these guys that are providing the data that supports the reign of a Maya king? Now, and it's supporting the reign of a Maya king in the 9th century, right? The dates of the events on the wall, right? The event of the king portraying that god, that happens in 815 AD. Many Maya cities have gone dark at this point. They're no longer writing inscriptions. But at Xultun, our king is appearing on the wall of a house of geeks. Those geeks are not terribly well-dressed geeks, as geeks often aren't. Here we have, on the west wall, this is the guy that Max found. That's the circle that I was talking about earlier. We now know that it's connected to a guy whose face goes the other way. But they wear this single medallion on their chest. They're all painted in black. They wear this loincloth, medallion on the chest, medallion in their headdress, a single red feather coming up. He's named as Sahuntak. He's the senior obsidian. These are youths, right? The youthful obsidians. We have this core of people. This isn't a normal court scene for the Maya either. Right? If you see a Maya court scene on a Maya vase from the classic or the murals of Bonampak, everyone's dressed differently. They're all dressed in their finery. They're all there to be seen, to be recognized. These guys are all wearing the same outfit. This is a cohort. This is a group of people, a class in Maya society that's being represented in this space repeatedly and related to both the king and these calculations. These are my geeks. Now, Franco Rossi excavated under the floor of this space. And under the floor of this space, there's a burial. There are actually a whole series of burials in the courtyard near this place. And those burials aren't filled with tons of artifacts. These are not wealthy burials that we're looking at. This guy is buried with a single pot that you see here. But he's also buried with 2 objects, which are the medallions. One pierced for suspension around his chest, the other unpierced for being hung in his headdress. They're just ceramic. They're not bone or shell or anything else. They are ceramic discs that are covered in a thin white layer of plaster. And on that plaster is the remnants of black and red paint, the paint used by scribes. This is that room. This is that class of people. And in fact, one of the things that Franco is looking at now is this a house at all? Are we in fact looking at a house? Or are we looking at the workshop where these people work? Are we looking at the place where they're trained? Are we looking at a college? How is it tied to residential structures at the site of Xultun? We have all of these burials. What do those burials look like? Is it household burials? Are there men? Are there women? Are there children? Or, in fact, do we have a very different population being buried in this space? That will all be addressed in his dissertation. Now, I wanted to finish up by saying what happens between these two things? What happens between our murals at San Bartolo, of our divine king painted on the wall as the maize god, and our mathematical kingdoms that we have at Xultun at the end of the classic period? What are they doing between there? And there's one monument on the north end of Xultun that dates to the period in the early Classic that I just wanted to show a couple images of. Because I think that this monument will answer a number of these questions. Now, the whole thing, it's actually a huge, this is an elevation drawing. And it's a whole series of buildings, all of which were intentionally buried. They were preserved in their entirety. It's about 35 meters long, 15 meters high, and 60 meters deep. They are all covered in painted mottled stucco masks. All of their vaults are preserved. The ends tell a story of myth. We have here this crouching feline. Someone's like a sphinx, right? He actually, that's part of his face. He actually sits on top of this great stucco facade. This is just a 4-meter expanse which shows in the middle an individual being sacrificed. Okay? His eyes are slits. He's upside down. He doesn't have any legs. His belly has been bit in half by that large feline. There's blood squirting out everywhere, even down the side of him. But more importantly than that is that these things on the ends, they're not just decoration. Dave Stewart actually recognized them as hieroglyphic writing. They are 1 meter tall, 1 meter wide Maya glyphs in stucco. And what they say is this is just the number 9, and this is a location, an Imish place. But those particular locations are known throughout Maya, classic Maya inscriptions, as this sort of bizarre place. It's a paired location between a 9 Imish and a 7 black Khan. This is the number 7. In his ear, he wears the glyph for black, and Khan would have been there, destroyed by looters when they originally uncovered this structure. Those mythical locations of sacrifice are just the pillars on the ends of this enormous building, right? With these huge masks on the front. Those masks are about 5 meters wide and 5 meters tall, and they show this tree sprouting out of this big skeletal head. That tree has a little jaguar that jumps out of a hole in it. The head below is the patron deity of Xultun kings, the deity on which Xultun kings stand on the stela throughout their reign. That deity is crowned by a series of jewels, right? Ahau jewels. The whole thing is framed by birds and descending gods on the sidelines. Here's the face in the middle. The tree, you can see its branches coming out to the side, the little jaguar sprouting out. Here he is. These are the guys descending the sides. Now, what's going on is that even though the corners of this building, right, have these great jaguar, these mythic scenes, these mythic locations, right, of sacrifice or creation, the sprouting of the sort of ancestral tree, the monument in the very center is covered in portraits of kings. So that inside, what they've done with these structures is they have framed a monument covered in mat signs, symbols of kingship, pictures of kings themselves on all sides, and at the very center, a seated, full, round king on his throne with the names of his ancestors in his belt, right? This is that transition in which we're looking at our king, this king being framed, essentially, that all around him are these ritual locations, these sacred locations of myth. But between them is a monument to him and his ancestors, to dynasty, combining the same types of things that we would see at San Bartolo a few hundred years earlier and the things that we're moving towards at Xultun 400 or 500 years later. Remarkably, when they bury this structure, they bury it in two phases. The first thing they do is bury the dynastic monument and build a new one over the top. But they leave the mythic stuff exposed. That stuff stays, it's permanent. That doesn't need to be changed with the coronation of a new king. The stage is still the stage. The king simply has to appear a little higher up, a little bit taller, and on top of a base that encapsulates not just those myths, but his ancestry as well. So that in the early classic at Xultun, that's when we're moving. We're moving from this notion of simply divine kings to divine dynasties engaged in mythic action in the mythic past. And those actions need to be tied together, not just with a portrait of a myth, but with the calculations of the date and the place where those events happened. Right? What we're looking at is a transition between the pre-classic and the classic period. That transition is really being characterized by the development of dynasties and the incorporation of calendrical cycles, the importance of calendrical cycles, into the daily lives of those kings. Because without that history, without those cycles of time, they can no longer justify their position simply by being descendant from the gods. Because 400 years in, there are simply too many of them. Yeah, you're all descended from the gods. We've heard this before. Which god and when? And they've got the guys to tell them. Thank you.